look, we want you back. We're ready to continue to negotiate. I'm sure going forward, we would at least, be able to talk to them better and they will listen to us more, because shutting the door is definitely not good for us. Some people argue that we're better without them, and I would say we're always better, with everybody in the table. Let's celebrate this 50th anniversary together. Let's make Africa or ECOWAS stronger by doing business, amongst ourselves.
For months, West Africa has been at a crossroads. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Would Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger leave ECOWAS? Or was it just another political game? Now, the answer is clear. On January 29, 2025, their withdrawal became official. This is no longer speculation, it is a historic shift that has changed the structure of West Africa forever. But what does this mean for the economy? Will this move bring prosperity or financial collapse? Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. Finally, the three nations have left ECOWAS. Now let's talk about the impact as stated in the official press release. For years, ECOWAS masqueraded as more than just a political bloc. It was marketed as a beacon of unity, a structure that allowed millions of West Africans to move freely across 15 countries, to trade, work, and settle without borders, to feel like West Africa was one large home. That was the illusion. But illusions don't last forever. The moment Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger decided to break free from this neo-colonial club, ECOWAS revealed its true colors. Not as a champion of African prosperity, but as a gatekeeper of Western interests, an enforcer of economic servitude, and a political weapon designed to punish nations that dared to think independently. For decades, if you were a Burkinabe, you could settle in Nigeria without needing special permits. If you were Malian, you could work in Ghana as if it were your home. That was the convenience ECOWAS provided, but convenience at what cost? Beneath the surface, ECOWAS was never truly African-led. It was a proxy for external forces, a regulatory body that kept West Africa locked in a cycle of poverty while ensuring that Europe, the US, and their corporate allies continued to extract resources, wealth, and labor without resistance. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger realized this and decided to leave, the response wasn't one of respect. It was threats, warnings, and attempts at economic blackmail. The departure of these three nations shattered ECOWAS' carefully curated facade. Now, the biggest concern for millions of citizens is whether their ability to travel, work, and settle in neighboring countries will be taken away. So far, ECOWAS has claimed that nothing will change immediately. Citizens from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger can supposedly still move across borders, use their ECOWAS-branded passports, and work without facing major restrictions. But for how long? When an institution has shown itself to be petty, vindictive, and desperate to cling to power, the promise of stability is nothing more than a delaying tactic. The truth is, everything depends on how far ECOWAS is willing to go to punish these countries for daring to be free. If it takes a hard stance, it could suddenly decide to demand visas for its citizens, enforce work permits, or require proof of residency before allowing them to stay in ECOWAS nations. This wouldn't just be a bureaucratic inconvenience, it would be a direct act of aggression designed to destabilize families, force economic hardship, and weaken the labor force of these three countries. And let's not forget the thousands of Nigerians already living in Nigeria, Burkinabes in Ivory Coast, and Malians working in Senegal. Will ECOWAS try to displace them, forcibly sending them back as political hostages in an attempt to pressure their governments? This is the game ECOWAS is playing, the same ECOWAS that never imposed sanctions on corrupt leaders who sold out their people, the same ECOWAS that stood by while insurgency spread across the Sahel, the same ECOWAS that has always been quick to punish its people, but never its foreign masters. And now, the organization faces a decision. Accept its inevitable decline or lash out in ways that will only hasten its downfall. Anyways, travel isn't the only thing that will be impacted. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The second thing is trade. Trade is the oxygen of any economy. For landlocked nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, access to trade routes, supply chains, and regional markets is even more critical. Historically, these nations relied heavily on their ECOWAS neighbors for imports and exports. Food, fuel, construction materials, medical supplies, and machinery, all moving freely under the ECOWAS Trade Liberalization Scheme (ETLS). This arrangement was supposed to create an interconnected West African economy, one where tariffs and trade barriers were minimized to allow African nations to grow together. But now that these three nations have left, does that agreement still stand high? And if it doesn't, who benefits from their economic suffering? For now, ECOWAS has chosen not to impose immediate trade restrictions. Goods from Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are still moving through ECOWAS markets without additional tariffs or penalties. But let's not be fooled. This is not a gesture of goodwill. It's a temporary measure, a strategic pause while ECOWAS debates whether to tighten the noose. If the organization chooses to revoke trade privileges, the consequences will be severe. Imagine Nigeria or Ghana suddenly deciding to impose high tariffs on all products from Burkina Faso. The price of essential goods would skyrocket. Food supplies would slow. Construction projects would stall. Entire industries that depend on regional trade would be thrown into chaos. This isn't an accident. It's a calculated economic attack, a form of financial warfare designed to pressure these nations into crawling back to ECOWAS on their knees. But ECOWAS is playing a dangerous game. If it chooses this path, it could accelerate its irrelevance. Because Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger aren't waiting around to be strangled. They're already building alternative trade routes and forging new economic partnerships that don't rely on ECOWAS-controlled markets. Algeria, Chad, and even global players like Russia and China have entered discussions to replace ECOWAS as primary trade partners. If these negotiations succeed, ECOWAS will lose control over a massive section of the Sahel's economy, shifting economic power away from West African markets and toward new trade networks that exclude the bloc entirely. And it's not just governments making moves. Businesses are adapting. Entrepreneurs, traders, and manufacturers who once relied on ECOWAS supply chains are now finding new logistics routes, diversifying their imports, and seeking out alternative suppliers. The longer ECOWAS hesitates, the more it pushes its former members to become economically self-sufficient, something it never wanted. But here's the real irony. If ECOWAS tries to impose harsh economic measures, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could retaliate. What happens if they decide to block ECOWAS access to critical resources? What if Niger cuts off its uranium exports that power European nuclear plants? What if Burkina Faso and Mali restrict access to gold and agricultural goods that flow through ECOWAS markets? These nations hold economic leverage that ECOWAS severely underestimates, and if forced into a trade war, they might not be the ones who suffer the most. This is why ECOWAS is now at a crossroads. It must decide whether to accept its decline gracefully or fight back in a way that ensures its destruction. Because if it pushes too hard, it won't just be Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger leaving, other nations will follow. Guinea is already questioning its ECOWAS membership. Chad is watching closely. Even Mauritania, which previously left ECOWAS, is observing how this situation unfolds. The balance of power in West Africa is shifting, and ECOWAS is running out of time to decide whether it will adapt or collapse under the weight of its arrogance. But after this official exit, who is at a loss? When three nations walk away from a regional bloc, there's always one pressing question. Who takes the bigger hit? Is it Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who are now standing alone? Or is it ECOWAS, which just lost a massive chunk of its territory, resources, and strategic influence? If you listen to ECOWAS loyalists and Western media, they'll tell you this exit is a catastrophe for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. They'll say these nations have just isolated themselves, cut off trade, and will struggle to survive without the so-called economic protections of ECOWAS. But this is pure propaganda.
In my opinion, I believe what ECOWAS is doing is right by ensuring that they keep opening up the window for discussion. because yes, we're going to be 50 this year. That is ECOWAS. I believe that we should be going stronger rather than going weaker. And so the problem, in my opinion, that we have on hand right now is three of our members seem to not be clear and be, understand that they live in the communion or community is to their detriment. I think the right thing to do is to find a way of getting them back into the fold rather than, allow them go. In my opinion, whatever is driving them right now, I believe that when we're able to educate them better.
A closer look at the numbers, the geography, and the geopolitical shifts taking place tells a very different story. ECOWAS is the real loser here, and the long-term consequences of this withdrawal could be devastating for the bloc. Geographically, ECOWAS is now smaller and weaker than it was before. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger together form the heart of the Sahel, a massive stretch of land that connects West Africa to North Africa. By losing these three nations, ECOWAS has effectively cut off its access to key transit routes, trade corridors, and military influence over the Sahel region. This isn't just about losing members, it's about losing control over one of Africa's most strategic regions. Without Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, ECOWAS now has weaker leverage over trans-Saharan trade routes. Goods that used to flow smoothly through ECOWAS markets will now have to go through non-ECOWAS trade networks, meaning that the bloc just lost its monopoly over Sahelian trade. That means Algeria, Chad, and Libya now hold greater influence over the movement of goods, making them stronger competitors in the African trade ecosystem. The loss of territory also affects security cooperation. For years, ECOWAS positioned itself as the leading force in counterinsurgency efforts across West Africa, particularly in the fight against insurgent groups in the Sahel. But without Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which have been at the forefront of that fight, ECOWAS is now missing the key players that were holding the line against these groups. Without their intelligence, their military coordination, and their geographic positioning, ECOWAS security operations are now significantly weakened. And while ECOWAS still has major economic players like Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast within its ranks, the reality is that the loss of the Sahel states cuts off a vital piece of West Africa's defense system. The security balance has shifted, and ECOWAS is now vulnerable to threats that these three nations have been managing. The biggest myth being pushed is that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger will suffer economically from leaving ECOWAS. But let's break that down. Yes, ECOWAS accounts for a large portion of West Africa's trade. Yes, it has historically facilitated the movement of goods across the region. But the question is, who was benefiting from this system? The answer? Not Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. These three nations have long been at the bottom of ECOWAS' economic hierarchy. While countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast built strong industrial and export markets, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were primarily used as resource extraction zones. Their role in the ECOWAS economy was largely to supply raw materials to larger economies while being forced to import expensive finished goods. They were locked into a system where they had to export their gold, uranium, and agricultural products at low prices, only to buy back processed goods at inflated rates. By leaving ECOWAS, these nations are now free to set their trade policies, negotiate better deals, and build economic relationships outside of West Africa. And guess what? They're already doing it. New trade partnerships with Algeria, Chad, Russia, and China are rapidly forming, and these deals are expected to be far more beneficial than the restrictive economic conditions of ECOWAS. ECOWAS, on the other hand, just lost three of the biggest natural resource suppliers in West Africa. Niger supplies a significant portion of the world's uranium, which fuels European nuclear plants. Burkina Faso and Mali are major gold producers, contributing billions of dollars in exports. By losing direct access to these resources, ECOWAS members who rely on them, especially France, will now have to go through more complicated trade channels and possibly pay higher prices. Meanwhile, these nations are actively working to create their financial system, potentially moving away from the CFA franc, a currency long controlled by France through ECOWAS institutions. If they succeed in establishing an independent currency, ECOWAS will lose even more financial control over West Africa. Beyond the economic and geographic losses, this exit has shattered the credibility of ECOWAS as an institution. For years, ECOWAS presented itself as the ultimate authority in West African affairs, acting as a political referee that dictated economic policies, security decisions, and diplomatic engagements. But the fact that three nations could simply walk away, defying ECOWAS without suffering immediate collapse, proves that the bloc is not as powerful as it claimed to be. This sets a dangerous precedent for ECOWAS. If Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger can leave without being brought to their knees, what stops other nations from considering the same path? Guinea, which has also been critical of ECOWAS's actions, could be next. Chad, which has a complex relationship with West Africa, might rethink its alliances. Even Mauritania, which left ECOWAS in the past, could feel vindicated by this move. And then there's the elephant in the room, the alliance of Sahel states AES, the new regional bloc formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. If this alliance proves to be successful, it could become a direct competitor to ECOWAS, offering an alternative path for West African nations who want to escape the bloc's influence. This is the nightmare scenario for ECOWAS, a rival organization that operates free from Western control, one that could attract more nations and weaken ECOWAS' grip over the region. And the more ECOWAS tries to punish Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the more it exposes its insecurity and desperation. This is not a loss for the three nations, it's a rebirth. And the longer ECOWAS refuses to acknowledge this reality, the faster its decline will accelerate. So, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger didn't just leave ECOWAS. They exposed it. They revealed it for what it truly is, a colonial relic, a bureaucratic stronghold designed to keep West Africa dependent on Western powers, a gatekeeper that serves foreign interests rather than African prosperity. The mask has fallen. The illusion of ECOWAS as a force for good is gone. And despite the withdrawal, ECOWAS has tried to downplay the impact, claiming that its doors remain open to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But let's be clear, this is not an act of goodwill. This is a damage control strategy, a reluctant admission that outright hostility could backfire. ECOWAS knows that if it imposes harsh restrictions, it risks accelerating the formation of a rival economic and political bloc, one that could challenge its dominance in West Africa. So instead, it is pretending to be open to future cooperation, hoping that time will force these nations to reconsider.
In Africa where Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali are due to withdraw officially from the group of West African states today. In a statement released by ECOWAS, the window for negotiation is still open. ECOWAS says, following the announcement, all relevant authorities within and outside its region, and member states as well, will recognize national passports and identity cards bearing ECOWAS logo. Treat goods and services coming from the three countries in accordance with the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme and investment policy. And finally, allow citizens of the three affected countries to continue to enjoy the right of visa-free movement, residents and establishments in accordance with the protocols until further notice. They also agreed to favor a global approach to negotiations and relations with ECOWAS within the framework of the alliance. Relations between ECOWAS and the three nations has been tense after military coups took place in Mali in 2020, Burkina Faso in 2022, and Niger last July. ECOWAS condemned all three of the coups, suspended their membership and pressed them to restore civilian rule. But the military leaders have failed to oblige.
There is no way the nations are getting back to ECOWAS. Now, the question is not whether Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger made the right choice. The question is, who will be next? Will Guinea break free? Will Chad refuse to be controlled? Will other nations realize that independence is possible and follow the path of these three fearless nations? One thing is certain, ECOWAS is not the future of Africa. The future belongs to those who refuse to be controlled. And today, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have proven that they are not just survivors. They are leaders of a new, independent Africa. The era of submission is over. The era of sovereignty has begun. Do you think more nations will leave ECOWAS? Will ECOWAS try to get the nations back? Let us know in the comments section. Can ECOWAS win them back? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.